So picking up where we left off, we talked about, I think this was, dang it, I am so clumsy here. So we talked about the duodenum and the chyme, and we talked about how everything is broken down. And I think where we left off was this portion here. The jejunum and the ileum mostly extract water. So I'm going to go back to a picture so it's more clear. So this is your jejunum. There's microvilli there. It absorbs all the nutrients. And then right here, the last part of the small intestine is the ileum, and there is an ileocecal junction. There is a sphincter there that is in a valve. It's almost like a valve. It's a one-way valve. It makes sure that the food goes from the small intestine into the large intestine and never goes back. So it's a one-way valve. It's called the ileocecal valve. The first place in the large intestine that it attaches, the food comes into, is the cecum. It's almost like a pouch. It's kind of, you can see this one is the appendix. It's kind of the appendix is is an extension of the cecum. So a lot of the food is proteins are digested. It goes into the duodenum. The fats and carbohydrates and the nucleic acids are digested. It goes down. It's going through the jejunum. All the nutrients, the substrates are absorbed through the microvilli, and it goes down this, comes into the ileum. Ileum is the last part of the small intestine, and at that point, it then enters the cecum. The cecum has a one-way valve to make sure that the food doesn't go from here into here. Make sense? Okay, in the cecum, again, a lot of the food, water and salts begin to absorb. Remember, as the food is coming down through this, it kind of gets a little more dry. So what's going to happen here is that the cecum has a very thick mucosal layer, so the food is kind of mixed with mucus, and then it starts its final travel. It travels through that, up there, that way, and then goes down, goes through the rectum and up the anus. In this area, the large intestine area, mostly water is reabsorbed. So I hope that's clear. If it's not, just send me an email. The pancreas, I think we talked about this. Why does the pancreas, why is it that the pancreas has a more basic kind of secretion? The cells that do the secretion is the Eisner cells. The solution is basic because the stomach acids makes it very acidic, so you want to neutralize it. Again, remember in the previous chapters as well as the previous videos on this, when we talked about proteins being denatured, trypsin and chymotrypsin, as well as all the amylases, actually cannot survive in such a high acidic environment. The only thing that can work in that high acidic environment is pepsin. So step one is to actually neutralize the stomach acids before you pump in all the different enzymes. So a lot of bicarbonates are pumped in there so they can be neutralized. We've talked about bile already. I think the part that we have to go into, the bile is actually made in the liver, but it's stored in the gallbladder. I'm going to go back to the image. So it's going to be made here in the liver, stored in the gallbladder, and this is the duct that brings it into the duodenum. And most of you have tasted bile. Again, this is like the grossest video about vomiting. If you've like puked a lot and like you're super sick and you've been puking a lot, you have like this towards the end of your puking session, you have this really bitter, kind of yellowish green, weird looking throw up that comes in. It's usually the end of it. That's usually bile. And you know, it's extremely bitter. We have talked about the microvilli and how there is absorption. Remember, the microvilli is made up of epithelial tissue. They're single layered epithelial tissue. They're not when we talked about the esophagus, we said that the inside of the esophagus was made up of stratified squamous. That means many layers. Out here, it's single. The way nutrients pass this layer is through basic diffusion, moving along along the concentration gradient, and it's absorbed by the blood. Now, here's where it gets very interesting. The blood that is picked up cannot be directly sent into the body because there are a lot of toxins. For example, if you take a lot of medication, there are these medications, the residues of it and the chemical components of it are in your stomach. You don't send it all over the body. What you would do is it has to actually go through the liver, and the liver goes through a process of detoxification. So all the blood actually goes through a hepatic portal vein, and the hepatic portal vein, hepatic meaning the liver, all the blood from the stomach, from the small intestine, large intestine, is collected into not the artery system, but the vein systems. And then from there, it goes into the liver. There is a detoxification process taking place just in case, you've eaten heavy metal, which you probably have a little bit, here and there. And then after that purification is over, then it goes back into the heart. And when we talk about the cardiovascular system, we'll talk about how it goes from the heart to the liver to all the other places in the body. The colon is the colon, or the large intestine. That is the place where most of your water is reabsorbed. Now, we've all heard of people having colon polyps and having colon cancer and ulcers. It's, as you can see, how it's all has these little knots. It has nooks and crannies. So you could have, like, diverticulitis is one of those diseases that's causes an ulceration in one of these nooks and crannies. When you get a prostate check, basically that's what they're checking for, to make sure that there is no polyps in there. What happens when too much water is absorbed? If too much water is absorbed, you are constipated. Oh my God, this video is getting grosser by the second. If too little water is absorbed, for example, if you have a disease like cholera, the bacteria affects the permeability of the Vibrio cholera affects the permeability of the large intestine. So very little water is reabsorbed into the body. And so you have what is called as the rice water diarrhea, or so you lose a lot of water, and you were supposed to drink a lot of water with electrolytes and everything. As long as you drink water, you'll be fine. So if there's too little water absorbed, then you're going to have diarrhea. If too much water is absorbed, you're going to have constipation. This is gross. Now, let's look at symbiotic. What does the word symbiotic mean? Where two organisms live in a mutualistic relationship where both of them benefit from the other. Within our gut, your small intestine, large intestine, you have your own almost 500 different species of bacteria. They are your own little flora and fauna, your own little subjects to rule over. You give them food and they pay you back in taxes. Vitamin K, they break down cellulose, the cell wall of plant cells. They break down cellulose. So it's like your own little presidency you've got going on there. Not presidency, actually, monarchy. Your own little monarchy you have going on. The large intestine has a whole bunch of them. Now, why don't we eat feces? I have no idea why this textbook is asking you that question. We don't eat them because they're basically bacteria. The body has expelled them. However, coprophagia is pretty common in dogs and gorillas because their diet is a little more restricted than ours. They tend to eat bacteria that has been shed in poop. And so they can replenish their own flora and fauna. Now, there are problems with in the past couple of decades, we have been using antibiotics like indiscriminately, right? If you get a cold, you use an antibiotic because, oh, well, what the hell, right? So one of the biggest problems that people are seeing right now is a bacteria called Clostridium difficalis, or C. diff. Clostridium. I think I can write it here. It's called C. diff. What usually happens is when you take a lot of antibiotics, and sometimes these antibiotics are non-discriminatory. They're not, antibiotics are not as discriminatory as you think they are. They actually either target the difference in ribosomes. Bacteria and prokaryotes and eukaryotes have different size ribosomes, or they might target the cell wall, the cell membrane. One of them is, ours is has phospholipids, and theirs has peptidoglycan. So there are basic things that are that a broad spectrum antibiotic targets. It's not always just E. coli in H7H0157 that is the has the same characteristics. And bacteria are broken down into classes, and most of them have the same characteristics, similar characteristics. Most of them have similar ones. Like you look at all the gram positives and all the gram negatives, they have similar characteristics. So if you take too much antibiotics, basically you're killing off your own little subjects. It's like living in Syria, right? At some point of time, you're going to kill all the citizens. So I mean, they're doing that already. If you think about living in the Middle East, at some point in time, a bomb is going to get you, even if you were not, like, a part of Assad's regime or whatever. So once you start killing off your own bacteria like Clostridium diff, which is a very opportunistic bacteria, kind of takes over that space. One of the things that keeps these hostile bacteria from taking over your your gut system is the fact that you have your own little subjects that fight a battle against the bacteria coming from outside. So it's like an illegal immigrant situation. Now, if there is a huge die off of your own bacteria, you kind of have to get the people in the boats to come in. Once these guys come in, they are very, very, very harmful to the body. A person with a C. diff deficiency actually cannot be more than 5 or 10 minutes away from a bathroom, because they're constantly pooping. It affects the permeability of their the intestine. It affects how their digestion takes place. They are really, really sick, and their C. diff is pretty much antibiotic resistant. One of the only very, very effective methods for to cure C. diff is to do a fecal transplant. Basically, what they'll do is they will test the fecal material of people, and look for feces that does not have any C. diff, but has a robust culture of E. coli, staph, streptococci, different groups of them, streptococci, staphylococci, different groups that has a very robust culture of them, and then kind of make a slurry of it and inject it into your cecum. So then, and then put you on an no antibiotic regime, so that it kind of takes over where C. diff lives. That is literally one of the only effective treatments they have for C. diff. It's gross that you're getting, it's called fecal transplant is not the most. It's not something you want to write home about. It's not like you want to sit down and write a letter about fecal transplant. But it is a very viable option for a lot of diseases. This is a good picture for you. You can see the cecum here. The cecum is very the carnivorous animals have a different size of a cecum, and we'll talk about carnivores versus herbivores. Carnivorous animals have a different size cecum versus herbivorous animals, because herbivorous animals eat a lot of cellulose based, which means the cell wall has to be broken down. Their cecum is usually much larger. It has a huge flora and fauna here bacteria that is able to produce the enzyme. If it's cellulose, the enzyme should be cellulase, is able to produce that. We ourselves cannot produce, like our body does not produce it. When we eat a lot of green leafy vegetables, it's the same thing. The bacteria breaks it open. You have a good picture of the sphincters, and these are like basically the levator sphincters. I don't need you to know all the sphincters. Just remember that there are 2 sphincters. I also don't need you to know the name, if is it a sigmoid colon? Actually, what you should know the sigmoid colon. The sigmoid colon is the last part of it, which is the S shape. The first part cecum, the last part sigmoid.